Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're breaking down the first college basketball DFS slate of the 2023-2024 season. Monday, November 6th, we got a nice little 12-game slate on DraftKings that we're going to break down here in this episode. And this is the start of college basketball season, which means it's the start of college basketball DFS season. If you were here for the podcast last year, welcome back. We used to do the audio-only podcast last year on Spotify and Apple, but now we've expanded. We're on YouTube as well. So if you're new watching on YouTube, hopefully you like what you see in this episode, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so that way you get notified when all new episodes drop, because we're going to be breaking down college basketball at least once a week through the end of football season. But you're also going to get notifications for our weekly golf, college football, and NFL content as well. But I can tell you pretty much once January comes around, this is pretty much exclusively a college basketball show. And last year was one of our best years ever playing college basketball DFS. I was able to be profitable thanks to a few big weeks in the non-conference season and in conference tournament season. So hopefully we're going to continue that this year. Today we've got a full breakdown of all 12 games, and I'm going to try to give you guys the best DFS plays on DraftKings to go ahead and fill out your lineups. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the analysis. All right, so it feels good to be looking at a college basketball board on DraftKings again. It feels like the offseason for college basketball lasts longer than other sports. I don't know why, but it's crazy to think about how time flies, because literally Selection Sunday last year was when me and my wife were having our gender reveal, letting us know that we were going to have a baby girl. And now, as of today on Sunday, that baby girl is 2 months old. So it just goes to show you how much time has truly gone by, in this, kind of passage of the college basketball season. But in college basketball, y'all, some things change, but some things stay the same. So this episode, I'm going to go ahead and get it out of the way now. This episode is a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of projection. It's a lot of predictions. None of these teams have played a game that matters in the 2023-2024 season yet. So all that we can do is read all the breakdowns we can, read up on the box scores of all the secret scrimmages and the exhibition games, look at numbers from last year, look at where guys are transferring to try to get a gauge of how these first few slates are going to go. If you are somebody who is tilted easily at playing a guy in DFS and him getting you 0 or him getting you 2 points or 4 points or something like that, then early season college basketball is probably not for you, because there's going to be a lot of guys we talk about in this episode that might end up busting. There's going to be some guys that we don't mention in this episode that end up booming. But all I can tell you is I have dug deep and done the research on pretty much all of these teams and come up with what I think is the best strategy, the best breakdowns, the best information that you guys can get for this first DraftKings slate. And with it being a non-conference slate, this is going to be the case with a lot of non-conference season, y'all. The slate of games is not exactly a whole lot of barn burners. There's going to be a lot of blowouts here on this first slate. It's going to be the case for really much of November until we get to the holiday tournaments. But the good news is with these blowouts, you get a lot of teams that are projected for 80 or more points, which means that when the team is scoring more points, there's going to be a lot more fantasy points to go around. The downside is if it's such a blowout that the team can rest its starters after halftime, then are they really going to be accumulating fantasy points from that anyway? So it's going to be interesting to gauge, with these blowouts, are there any that are going to be closer than expected? Are there going to be some teams that give their guys more run than expected or less run than expected? Or, is there going to be a blowout where, a guy just drops 40 in the first half and that's all he needs? It's all conjecture here at this point in the season. So let's go ahead and take a look at the games themselves. There are a few teams that are implied at 80 or more points here on this first slate. Going in ascending order, UNC is implied to beat Radford 80-62, and these numbers are courtesy of KenPom.com. It's one of the best college basketball data sites out there, but I'm not going to show it on my screen for copyright reasons. The next one is Michigan State over James Madison 80-63. That one to me has potential to be bigger. James Madison was actually 35th in tempo according to KenPom last year. So you're looking at Michigan State playing a team that plays pretty fast and should not be a match for them. That's the recipe for the Spartans to put up a lot of points. Next one is UConn over Northern Arizona 81-58. Then you got Purdue over Samford 82-62. The biggest spread on the slate is Duke over Dartmouth 83-58. And then you've also got Alabama over Morehead State 84-62. And Bama played with the fourth fastest tempo in the nation last year. So this one's going to feature a lot of points scored. I don't think the Bama defense is all that good. So I do think that playing Morehead State guys is going to be valuable. And then in the highest two implied total teams, you've also got Marquette over Northern Illinois, 85-61, and then Kansas over NC Central, 85-54. Excuse me, that is actually the biggest one on the slate, is Kansas over NC Central by 31 points. Now, there is one really close game on the slate, and that is USC versus Kansas State, projected to be 72-71. That's probably the game where you can be most certain that all the starters are going to play their full minutes load. All right, now, let's go ahead and start breaking down position by position. So we're going to start with the guards, and we're going to kind of work our way down the board on DraftKings. So at the top of the board, the guard position sits Tyler Kolek of Marquette. And hey, I totally get it. He was really good last year as a starting point guard for the Golden Eagles. But what was interesting with Tyler Kolek last year was that his fantasy point totals last year were almost directly correlated with Marquette's team totals. When Marquette scored more points, Tyler Kolek scored more points, which would seemingly be good, in a game where Marquette is projected to score more than 80 points, right? But the problem is Tyler Kolek actually did not do a whole lot in blowout wins. He kind of accumulated his fantasy points in the first half and then sat in the second half. So I think this would be a recipe for, if this game is able to stay close, that would be how Tyler Kolek would be able to reach his ceiling, and it's a pretty darn high ceiling. Last year in the NCAA tournament kind of gave you a little bit of a picture of how he's treated during blowouts. He only played 26 minutes against Vermont and only had 19 fantasy points in that game. Now, like I said, the strategy with him is you want him to play that full minutes load, right? And you want Marquette to score a lot of points. So if I'm playing Tyler Kolek, I'm probably going to pair him up with another Marquette Golden Eagle or even another Northern Illinois Husky on the other side. Just that way I make sure I accumulate fantasy points if this game stays close or if Marquette's total keeps rising. Now, next on the board is a guy that I like a lot. It's Aaron Estrada. He was great at Hofstra last year, and it's a guy that nobody really knows about, nobody really watched because, it was Hofstra. And so now he's at Alabama, and if he's able to maintain the same usage that he had at Hofstra, he's just going to be absolute dynamite at Alabama. He had a 29% usage rate last season on Hofstra, and Hofstra play with a much slower tempo than what he's going to see with Alabama this year. So theoretically, if he maintains the same usage rate with this Alabama team playing at a very fast tempo, he is going to get a lot of shots. He's going to get a lot of assists. He's going to have a lot of chances to accumulate fantasy points. Now, and it would appear that this is going to be the case with him at Alabama. He took 20 shots in their exhibition game against Wake Forest. And now I don't think you can just base everything off these exhibition games, but a guy taking 20 shots in an exhibition game that was pretty close tells me that Aaron Estrada is going to be one of the focal points of this Alabama offense. And so I do think he's a pretty solid option here on this first slate. And like I said, Alabama's defense can be scored on. So there's going to be some Morehead State guys that we talk about later. They're definitely going to be in my player pool on this opening Monday. AJ Hogard is a guy that is honestly going to be a fade for me. We talk about in college basketball, when you're looking for fantasy points, you want to get 4 times their salary, right? So if a guy's $8,000 on DraftKings, you want to be able to get 32 fantasy points. If you get a whole lineup of guys that get 4 times their salary, then that is going to give you pretty much a cash in, a double up or 50-50, maybe a min cash in a GPP. In a GPP, you really want 5 or 6 times their salary. And with AJ Hogard, I don't really see the potential for him to get to much more than 4 times his salary. I don't think he's likely to get to even 4 times his salary. Not a whole lot changed with this Michigan State team. They're bringing back pretty much everybody from last year's team that made the Sweet 16. And on that team, AJ Hogard was not regularly an $8,000 price player, and he didn't really hit value for that price tag a whole lot, just did not have a whole lot of games in the high 30s and 40s. So at this price tag of $8,600, he's going to be a fade for me until I see that he can score enough fantasy points to pay off that very high price tag. Nick Timberlake of Kansas is kind of the same way for me. He really didn't do a whole lot in Kansas's, exhibition games. So I'm kind of just basing it off of that. But, again, he's got a price tag of $8,300. And so he's got to pay that off with at least 32 fantasy points. And I'm just not really seeing a path for him to get there with all the guys that Kansas has on him. And I just don't see him accumulate enough shots, rebounds, and assists to get there. So he is also going to be on my fade list for Monday. Now, a guy that is going to be on my playlist, and if you are playing on FanDuel, this is probably the number one guy I would make sure to get into my lineup on the FanDuel slate. It's Tyler Perry of Kansas State. No, I'm not talking about Medea. I'm talking about a guard transfer out of North Texas that is pretty darn solid. Like last year at North Texas, he averaged 28 fantasy points per game, and he was playing on a team that played at one of the slowest tempos in the nation. So if you're able to accumulate that amount of fantasy points on a team that is getting into rock fights every game, then that's pretty impressive. And I definitely see a pathway for him to very easily pay off that price tag of $8,000. When you look at Kansas State, they are vacating a lot of their usage from last season, which means that a lot of their shots, a lot of assists are going to be open for guys to take from take onto this year's team, I should say. So they are vacating 27.6 usage rate from Marquise Noel, 24.7 usage rate from Keontae Johnson. Their other big, Naquan Tomlin, is suspended. And so last year, Tyler Perry had a 24% usage rate at North Texas. If he just slides into this team at that 24% usage rate, which is less than Marquise Noel had, and it's not even factoring in the loss of Tomlin or Johnson, then that's a very easy pathway for him to get a lot of more fantasy points with Kansas State playing at a much more reasonable tempo than North Texas did. Tyler Perry is one of my favorite high-priced guards on the Monday slate. Now, heading down in the 7K range, I'm going to kind of group a lot of these guys together. Stephen Castle, Justin Edwards, and DJ Wagner of Kentucky, they're all in the same category for me where they are freshmen who were big-time recruits and have a lot of upside because, hey, what if they're really good, right? But keep in mind, we don't really know what their role is going to be on their team. We don't know how the shots are going to shake out. We do know that a lot of the usage on their teams was vacated. Like obviously, UConn losing Jordan Hawkins, losing Adama Sanogo, Kentucky losing Kesan Edwards and Oscar Sheboy. Like there's going to be shots to go around for these guys, but I don't know how much of it it's going to be. I don't know how many minutes they're going to play. So I would classify them as GPP plays where you can play them with upside in mind. Just don't be mad when they give you that 8 fantasy points with the little snow symbol next to them because I just don't really know what their role is going to be on this team yet. So I cannot recommend them with a whole lot of confidence. Now, one guy that I do like a lot for this slate is RJ Davis of North Carolina, priced at only $7,700. And I forgot to mention from the top, but if you have not listened to the podcast before, I live in North Carolina, so I am very much in tune to when it comes to college basketball, my team, the Texas Longhorns, the college that I graduated from, the Charlotte 49ers, the college that my dad graduated from, the Dayton Flyers, and then the 4 North Carolina schools, North Carolina, Wake Forest, Duke, and NC State, because that's all everybody talks about in North Carolina. It's a big-time college basketball slate, or college basketball state, I should say. So there's a lot of people that are really excited about RJ Davis this season because he finally gets unshackled from Caleb Love. Caleb Love was a guy from North Carolina that shot a lot more than he should have, and RJ Davis is a guy that probably didn't get as many shots as he should have because Caleb Love was so ball dominant. Well, guess what? Now Caleb Love is no longer part of the equation. North Carolina is projected to score over 80 points against Radford. And in the preseason exhibitions, RJ Davis was much more involved in the offense than their other new acquisition guard, Paxton Wojcik, was. So I definitely think RJ Davis is a guy that you can go to with confidence early and often this DFS season because I think that his role without Caleb Love is going to be much, much bigger. Now, heading down to the 6K range. There are a few guys in this 6K range that I do like. Kevin McCullough is actually the Kansas guard that I want to play here at the start of the season. Last year, he was pretty solid for the Jayhawks, averaging 28 fantasy points per game. And that was without a huge role in the offense because a lot of the shots on that Kansas offense were taken by Jalen Wilson and by Grady Dick. Well, guess what? Neither of the two of them are there anymore. And so I think that's a great recipe for McCullough to get more shots. And, he's at a price tag where he averaged 4 times value for the price tag that he's currently at right now. I think it's quite frankly a misprice at $6,700. And then when you look at what he did in the exhibition game, he actually led Kansas in scoring in their exhibition against Illinois, which is pretty solid competition to be going up against. So if Kevin McCullough, who contributed last year with 7 rebounds and 2.5 assists, 2 steals a game, continues to contribute in those categories the way he did last year, and now has more of a scoring punch, has more usage on the offensive end, that is a recipe for some big-time fantasy performances from Kevin McCullough. He is one of my favorite guards in the 6K range. Now, at a very first glance, when the slate first came out last week, the guy that I immediately noticed as a misprice was Cam Jones of Marquette. He averaged 26 fantasy points last year, and he's priced at only $6,400. Marquette is a team that returned a lot of their team from last year. They really only lost Omax Prosper. So I think you can really kind of pencil in the same role from Cam Jones. And in that role, he very easily hit 4x salary early and often. So he feels like an easy click in terms of a mispriced by DraftKings and a solid play on a points per dollar basis. And I do think he is stackable with Tyler Kolek, because if Kolek picks up a lot of assists, a lot of them are going to be going with Cam Jones. Now, also in the 6K range, a guy that I think is going to be kind of an obvious value play is going to be Kobe Johnson of West Virginia. He is going to be West Virginia's starting point guard at the start of the season, as they have a suspension to transfer from Arizona, Kerr Kriisa. And so every time you get an opportunity to be like a starting point guard at $6,300 for a team that's probably going to win in a blowout, that's a pretty good combination. Like, even if West Virginia does win in a blowout, I don't see Kobe Johnson sitting for a whole lot of minutes, just because they don't have a whole lot of depth at the guard position. So I think Kobe Johnson is going to be a pretty obvious click. I think he's going to be a pretty popular click, but I definitely think that he is available to click because of his role in that West Virginia offense. Now, Northern Illinois has a few guys that are pretty interesting. Kesan Williams is the first guy that I'm going to talk about. He's got a big Q tag next to his name on DraftKings, and I don't really know what to make of him playing or not playing. I do know that last year he did have a season-ending injury in January, and if he does play, he's a clear and obvious misprice at only $6,000, but we don't know if we're going to get the full Kesan Williams if he does play. So big question mark there, but if he does play, I would have a lot of interest in him. If you do not want to take that risk, though, or if we get news that he's out, Zarq Nutter was the guy that led the Northern Illinois in usage last season. The fantasy point totals weren't that great because he didn't really do a whole lot else other than score, but he was the usage leader. So he's a guy that's going to have the ball in his hands a lot against the team in Marquette that plays at a fairly decent tempo. So Zarq Nutter at $5,700 is definitely not a bad play. Now, back up to the 6K range for one more play. Mark Freeman of Morehead State is out. He's actually the preseason Ohio Valley Conference Player of the Year, so that's a big loss from them. But when you look at what they did last year, because he missed a few games last year as well, Drew Thellwell was their second kind of usage guy last year. He was second on the team in usage behind Mark Freeman. So I kind of think he would be a guy that you could very easily go to for that reason. Only $6,000, averaged about 23 fantasy points, and you got to figure that total is going to go up with Mark Freeman out of the lineup. So Drew Thellwell is a guy that is definitely in play for me at his price. All right, now we're dipping down in the 5K range, so we're going to be dipping down to the part where there's going to be some clear misprices, and I do want to go ahead and get this out of the way when it comes to lineups and ownership in college basketball DFS. If you watch a lot of like NBA and NFL DFS shows, they're all about avoiding the chalk and like not playing guys who are super highly owned. But college basketball as well as college football are different. Chalky plays are chalky plays for reasons in these two sports, and sometimes the chalky plays are going to go off. So a lot of times it's up for you to determine what is good chalk and what is bad chalk. In other words, what's the high-owned player that I'm willing to play? What's the high-owned player that I'm not willing to play? And obviously they're going to be high-owned for various reasons, right? So as we get down into these value plays, a lot of these guys I'm going to mention as being chalky, and it's going to be up to you to discern, are these guys that I'm willing to play to take on a little bit of ownership into my lineups? So first up is going to be Riley Cornish of Dartmouth. He was Dartmouth's leading scorer last season, and he got a lot of usage. He had a 26% usage rate last year in this Dartmouth office. I think he is a very easy, safe option. I think he's got a high floor. He's probably not a guy that has a whole lot of GPP upside, because I think Dartmouth is going to get boat raced in this game against Duke, but he's definitely a guy that when this game is close, he's going to have the ball in his hands and he's going to be able to score some points. Now, NC Central is an interesting team. They've got a few guys who I think are obvious misprices, but Eric Boone is an interesting case. He was second on usage in their team last year. The guy that was first is gone, but I just don't think that this NC Central team is very good. I don't think they're going to be very close in this game against Kansas, but if, Lavelle Moten lets the starters run out there, and get extended minutes, then Eric Boone's going to be a guy that could very easily get to a high fantasy point total. Reese Waters is another guy that I got to talk about, who's a transfer into San Diego State from USC. And San Diego State's a team that's got a lot of usage up for grabs. They graduated a lot of their starting lineup from last year. Matt Bradley, their leading shot taker, is gone. And somebody's got to replace all the bricks that Matt Bradley put up. And what better guy to do that than Reese Waters? He was a pretty efficient player at USC, was kind of behind Kobe Johnson and Boogie Ellis in terms of usage in that backcourt. And so definitely a guy that I think has a little bit of upside. But San Diego State's a team that I do think you can leave off the board because they generally play at a pretty darn slow tempo. And I don't exactly think they're going to be one of the teams that we look at the end of the slate that gets to 80 or 90 points. Now, looking at some value plays, like heading deep down the board here, a guy that stood out to me early as some obvious chalk, he has dual eligibility, is going to be Terrence Edwards Jr. of James Madison. He is James Madison's best player. He was their best player last year. He was their highest usage player last year, and he has dual eligibility. So he makes a lot of different stuff with your lineup work at only $4,800. And even though JMU is greatly mismatched against Michigan State, I do think that both these teams are going to play at a solid tempo, and Terrence Edwards can contribute in ways other than score. He averaged 5 boards a game last year. So I definitely think he's a really solid play. He's going to be one of the highest owned guys on the slate because of that dual eligibility and what he showed in the box score last year. Now, dipping down all the way to 3,000. There are 2 guys that I think are just straight up misprices on the board here at $3,000. The first one is going to be Riley Minix of Morehead State. This is a guy that I think is super under the radar. Definitely a lot of risk in playing this one, but a lot of upside as well. He's an NAIA transfer into Morehead State, and all of their preseason publications, preseason season preview interviews and all that really hyped this guy up. He's projected to be a starter. The coach said that he's already one of their best players. He averaged 24 and 15 at an NAIA college last year. And yes, the competition was low, but like if the guy can get buckets, the guy can get buckets, right? So you still got to put the ball in the hoop no matter who you're going up against. So I definitely think that he's a guy that has a lot of upside. He's probably a guy that, if you put into your lineup, he can make a lot of else work. But I'm telling you on the front end, there's definitely a little bit of risk playing a guy who is an NAIA transfer. But what I am telling you is that all the preseason buildup is talking about this guy a lot for Morehead State. Now, the other guy that I think is a 3K misprice is Guy Fontal Roy, who plays for NC Central. So he is a transfer in from Austin Peay. He started at Austin Peay last season, and I think he's going to be a starter at NC Central. Austin Peay, it was kind of above NC Central, if I must say so. So if you're transferring down and you were a starter where you were at, I kind of think you're going to continue to be a starter. So you can get another starter for this NC Central team at only $3,000. And like I said, I don't think they're very good. I do think they're going to get like the doors blown off by Kansas. But if they're able to keep it close for a little bit and this guy starts and plays 30 minutes and gets you 17 fantasy points at $3,000, then that's going to be a good play at the end of the night and definitely a guy that you can consider for your lineups. All right, that does it for the guard position. So let's take a quick breather and then let's talk about the forwards. All right, so before we talk about the big fellas, I do want to talk about a few things. If you want more information from me, there are a few places that you can find me at. You can find me on X at Mike's Money Picks. I generally tweet out the college basketball DFS rundown before every slate, but not going to lie, with it being weekdays and there still being college football going on, I might not get to every single day, but I'm going to try to get the rundown out every day where I just go over a few of my favorite plays and kind of favorite categories of the day in college basketball. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description if you're listening on YouTube or audio. There's a lot of smart guys in there that talk DFS for a lot of different sports, NFL, college football, golf. I'm in there talking all the time about. And then there's a lot of guys in there who have helped me get a lot better at NBA DFS as well. Link is in the description if you want to get in that. And then I also have full articles that I write about every college football, college basketball, and NFL DFS slate on my Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I break down my core plays as well as talk about lineup strategy and ownership for each slate. Somebody one time, long time ago told me don't write for free. So very small $3 a month fee on the Patreon, but you do get those full articles and those breakdowns every slate. I can't guarantee you that every core is just going to smash every slate, but I can guarantee you that by reading them, learning the strategy, learning the information about these teams, it can help you get better at DFS for college basketball and college football. Now, also, if you're looking to try anything new this college basketball season, head on over to signupexpert.com/MikesPicks. We are partnered with SignUpExpert, and what they do is they give you the best offers and promo codes for new users on any DFS player prop or sportsbook site, and they sing it to your location for whatever is legal near you. So for me in North Carolina, I don't have sportsbooks yet, but I'm going to have them. And so you get those best offers for new users at signupexpert.com/MikesPicks. It also shows me some support by using my links as well. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the big fellas now. So the top 6 forwards on this slate, I think that you're going to want to get one of them into your lineups, but they're all in similar situations that all carry kind of a little bit of risk and a little bit of upside. So in order, you got Zack Edy, Hunter Dickinson, Armando Bott, Kyle Filipowski, Jesse Edwards, and Donovan Kingan. And that is quite the list of like just elite big men in college basketball, right? But here's the issue with all of them. All of them are in projected blowouts. And so you're looking at a scenario here where if your big guy only plays 20 minutes and only gets 24 fantasy points, that's going to be a pretty big disappointment because I guarantee you it's not going to happen to all 6 of them. And you're going to want to find the one that ends up reaching his ceiling. So which one is that going to be? Well, I'm not going to lie. Zack Edy, I think, is the guy who has the highest ceiling, also has the highest floor. He's going to look like Gulliver's Travels out there, just the giant amongst like just average size guys on Samford. And that generally went pretty well for him last year. Like you could pretty much just pencil him in for 40 fantasy points any given night last year. And in a salary of only 10 grand on DraftKings, I think that's very affordable to get to. Last year, he was priced up at 11 pretty much the entire second half of the season. Well, starting in February, he was priced up at $11,000 on DraftKings. So I think he's very easy to get to, and I don't have a problem going with Zack Edy. I think he is probably the safest option out of all the bigs, but you're also paying for that safety with the $10,000 price tag. Now, the guy that I like, though, I kind of like Armando Bott. I don't see any reason why he can't do exactly what he did last year. In fact, I don't see any reason why he can't beat what he did last year. Pete Nance, who was a pretty good rebounder in that North Carolina front court, is gone, as well as Leaky Black, who is also a pretty good rebounder. And then Caleb Love is gone on the offensive end, so there's going to be more shots for everybody else to go around. So I kind of think that Bacot should see a little bit of a boost in points, a little bit of a boost in rebounds, and he was already averaging a double-double last year. So if he gets you that bonus on DraftKings for getting a double-double and gets to like, say, I don't know, like 24 and 12, that's going to be a pretty good night for him. And I think he can do that in not a full game worth of work. So I really like Armando Bacot. Jesse Edwards also intrigues me a little bit. To me, he has an interesting ceiling because of Kerr Kriisa being out. Like, I think there's a chance that this West Virginia offense with no point guard just kind of funnels it into Edwards and just lets him do his thing. I also think there's a chance that their outside perimeter shooters aren't very good, and it's just there for Jesse Edwards to get a lot of boards. But last year when he was at Syracuse, he exhibited a very high ceiling, and I think he's in a better situation for fantasy scoring now that he's with West Virginia and not playing in the slow offense that is Syracuse and the 2-3 zone that is the Syracuse defense. So I really think that Jesse Edwards is in a pretty good spot as well. Donovan Kingan is an interesting one. I think Donovan Kingan's a sneaky, interesting bet to win National Player of the Year, and I think there's pretty good odds on that. When you look at what he did last year, he was like a fantasy point and a half per minute, which is just insane. When he was on the floor last year, he was dominant. But the question is, how much is he going to be on the floor? He is a little bit of an injury concern into this one. He was like just cleared like yesterday. And so I don't necessarily think they're going to give him a full like 25 to 30 minutes in this game, and that will not allow him to get his full ceiling. So I'm probably out on Kingan, but I do think long-term, I think he's a very interesting National Player of the Year bet just because of what he can do in such a limited amount of time. And I think the kid's really talented. If he is out, Samson Johnson, his backup, becomes a very easy click. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to these bigs, kind of in this order, if I had to rank them, I would go Edy, Bacot, Edwards, Filipowski, Dickinson, Kingan. Just in that order, that's kind of how I would play them. But hey, I think one of the 6 is going to have a ceiling game. I think one of the 6 is going to have a floor game, and it's going to be kind of playing Russian roulette to figure out which one it is. I will probably have more Edy and Bacot than the other 4, but I could definitely see the merits of all 6 of them. Now, Grant Nelson is a big question mark. So Grant Nelson's a transfer from North Dakota State who now plays for Alabama. Almost said Iowa for whatever reason. And while he is a big white guy, it's not Iowa, it's Alabama. So he was really good at North Dakota State. Like, he was kind of a unicorn. He was kind of like a college Porzingis, this guy who was really tall, really athletic, and could shoot as well. But I don't know if he's going to retain the same usage rate he had at North Dakota State, at Alabama. He only had 13-9 in an exhibition game against TCU. So it's yet to be seen what it's going to look like in the regular season. But I definitely think he's a little bit of a risk to play him, even at only $8,100 when he probably should have been much more than that at North Dakota State last season. Now, I like Arthur Kaluma's game. I really do. I liked him when he was at Creighton. I think he does a lot of things that help you win basketball games, but I don't like this price tag at all. He just didn't really show that high of a ceiling when he was at Creighton, and he didn't really show that high of a usage rate when he was at Creighton. Yes, Naquan Tomlin is out. Yes, Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel are gone, but I don't think Kaluma's just going to all of a sudden step in and, when his whole career he's never been that guy, is all of a sudden going to be a 15 to 20, field goal attempt per game guy. So I don't really like the price tag on DraftKings. I do think he's much more affordable on the FanDuel slate, but he's probably a pass for me until I see what his full role looks like, or until, his price gets adjusted down just a little bit. I would rather go down from Kaluma to Daviden Gasan of Kansas State. He's going to be probably the more true big with Naquan Tomlin out, and he didn't play a whole lot of minutes last year, but he was decently effective in low minutes. And so I would probably prefer to go down there because he's going to be the guy who's going to pick up a lot of those rebounds, and he's at a much more palatable price tag on DraftKings. Last one in the 7K range that I do want to talk about, though, is going to be Oso Egide of Marquette. He's a guy that last year did really well against undersized teams. Like, he had his best games against teams that didn't play a traditional 5-man or didn't have a whole lot of size for their 5-man. And so I think this is a pretty good spot for him against Northern Illinois. He also did pretty good in blowouts last year. So he's a guy I think you can play as the only Marquette guy even, but if you wanted to pair him up with a Tyler Kolek or a Cam Jones, or maybe run it back with a few Northern Illinois guys like Zarq Nutter, I do think that's an option as well. But I really like Oso Egide. I think he's at a very affordable price tag on DraftKings. Heading down into the 6K range now, there's just kind of not as much options at the forward position as there is guard. So this is going to be a little bit of a shorter segment. But Jaden Ledee is a guy that I like. He was used a lot when he was out there for San Diego State last year. Like, he's a guy that you can feed it into in the post and kind of run your offense through the low post. He was almost a fantasy point per minute guy at San Diego State who plays at just a turtle's pace in terms of a tempo. And amongst all of San Diego State's departures, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to fill in and play a lot of minutes. And if he retains that same usage rate, then he can very easily pay off his price tag at only $6,800. He's probably the San Diego State guy that I would be most likely to play on this opening night. DJ Rodman is another interesting one. He was, I thought, a really solid player at Washington State. He's transferring into USC. He's also the son of Dennis Rodman and the brother of Trinity Rodman of the U.S. women's soccer team. Yeah, it's totally crazy, that family dynamic, but I think it's pretty impressive. So he's a guy that was really good at Washington State. I don't know if he's going to be that good at USC because they have a lot of other guys who like to shoot the basketball. So I don't think the shot attempts are going to be there for DJ Rodman to pay off that price tag of only $6,700. But I think he's a talented player. I think he's got to keep an eye out for as the season goes on. Nick Pringle of Alabama is another guy that I like a lot. He had a super small sample size last year, didn't play in every game, didn't play a whole lot of minutes in a whole lot of games, but he was more than a fantasy point per minute guy when he was out there, because at the rate he goes, he can score and get rebounds at a very quick rate. Like, he just does a lot when he's out there. And if he is in a bigger role this season for Alabama, all the guys they lost, if he's in a bigger role, then he can very easily pay off this price tag of $6,100. He had 13-9 in the scrimmage against Wake Forest that they had earlier in November. So I definitely think he is an option at that price tag. And don't be surprised if he's a guy that, as the season goes on, ends up being a guy that we talk about a lot here on this show, because I think he's got a very high ceiling. Now, heading down in the 5K range, there's a few guys that are pretty interesting. Carson Tout of Northern Arizona and Samford's Jermaine Marshall are guys that were really productive players last season, and they stayed at the same school. They figured to be in line for another good season, but they face really tough matchups in, Northern Arizona taking on Connecticut, Jermaine Marshall and Samford taking on Purdue, and there's a risk of foul trouble as well because those two teams have dominant bigs. So I think that on paper they look like really solid plays. But I would just be a little bit cautious of that foul trouble. If you're playing like a cash game, though, and you want to be totally super risk averse, those are two really easy guys you can click here in the 5K range. Now, in the 4K range, Raekwon Horton is a guy that I want to mention. He's a guy that was at College of Charleston last year, and Charleston made that little run in the NCAA tournament. I was impressed with his game when he was out there last year. I thought he was a pretty solid player that just didn't really feature him as part of the offense. He did a lot of little things that kind of helped him win when he was out there, though. And he's transferring to JMU from Charleston. I think that's a little bit of a step down. And so I think that he could be in line for increased playing time, could be in line for an increased role. Just a name to look out for. Maybe could pan out this game, but I definitely think as the season goes on, if we get JMU again, don't be surprised if he's a guy that comes up again. Will McNair Jr. is another guy I got to mention. He's a guy that I played just a little bit of last year when Mississippi State had some front court issues. And when he got the start, he was okay. Like, he was serviceable. He never really had any massive games, but he had some games where when he was called upon to start and play big minutes, he came through with 18 to 20 fantasy points, right? And that could be the situation here at Kansas State because Naquan Tomlin is out, and they're going to need some size down low, and he could be that size. So I definitely think he is worth a roll of the dice at only $4,100. Now, in the 3K range, there are three guys that I want to talk about. Keep in mind with this 3K range, super not what's the word I'm looking for here? Not safe plays. Like guys that have a little bit of upside, but guys that could also totally bust. Sam Walters is the first one I'm going to talk about. He is the secret scrimmage darling for Alabama. He's a guy that in their early exhibitions, including the secret scrimmage, played really, really well. He had 29 points against TCU, had 13 points against Wake Forest. It appears he's going to be a part of this Alabama team, this Alabama rotation, right? Now, how big he is a part of that, I don't exactly know, but at only $3,700, I'm willing to pay to find out. And so he is a guy that I'm going to be playing a little bit of, and he's a freshman. So generally speaking, college coaches, when they have these blowout wins early in the season, if they're freshmen that they're looking to kind of get in the groove of things and playing college basketball, they tend to give them a lot of run. So maybe Sam Walters could be a beneficiary of that. At only $3,700, I don't think there's a whole lot of opportunity cost to finding that out. The guy with the longest name on the slate, Yannick Conan Niederhauser. Nailed it. He is a guy that projects to be one of Northern Illinois' key big men. I think that he could be in line for a lot bigger role than he had last year. Only $3,400. Not a great matchup against Marquette, but just maybe he's worth a roll of the dice at only $3,400. Now, there is one 3K misprice that I do want to mention, which is Emanuel Aunor. He was a starter at High Point University and transferred to North Carolina Central. Again, I believe the other North Carolina Central transfer I said this about, it's a little bit of a transfer down, in my opinion, where you're going from the Big South to the MEAC. And so if you're able to start at High Point, you're probably going to be able to start at North Carolina Central, a team that doesn't have a whole lot of size to begin with anyway. And they're going to be taking on Kansas with Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams in the front court. So Aunor is a guy that is going to have to play some big minutes if he can stay out of foul trouble. But I do really think he could smash that price tag at $3,000 if he's going to be out there on the floor for North Carolina Central. All right, that does it for this episode. That does it for day one of the college basketball DFS season. Hopefully you guys saw what you like here in this episode. If you did, please hit the like button on YouTube. It really helps me out a lot. Also, subscribe to the channel. We're closing in on 200. You'll be notified when all of our college basketball, college football, NFL, and golf content drops. And like I said, guys, this is day one of the season. Hopefully I was able to give you guys some good information. We're going to be able to kind of be a little bit more proactive, well, I guess a little bit more reactive once we have data, once we have a little bit of a sample size to see how these college teams are playing. A lot of what you saw here today is going to be conjecture, but hey, I did all the research. I'm hoping that some of those conjectures are going to be right. Hoping I'm going to help you win some money here this college basketball DFS season. And I'm hoping that it was somewhat entertaining during this episode. Try to have a little bit of personality with it. Try to have a little bit of fun with it is what I do on here. So hopefully was able to keep you guys entertained and give you guys some good information. If you like what you saw, like and subscribe, and I will see you the next time we're going to do a college basketball slate. I don't know what the schedule is going to look like for what DraftKings is going to do and for what everything is going to look like. So I will be back here to talk college basketball at some point. But until then, best of luck to you guys in all your DFS endeavors. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will see you next time.